Our meeting is officially convened. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of, is the consent agenda. Oh no, it's the roll call. It's the roll call.
Yes.
So,
Trustee Joshi. Trustee Joshi.
You're muted. He's muted.
Yes, I was muted, correct.
Yep. Trustee
Yes.
Petty.
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Here.
Chair Moreau.
Here.
Thank you.
We're all here. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of June 25th, 2020. Does anybody have any corrections or additions to the minutes? Okay. And we need to vote on the minutes.
No, it's just one item of the consent agenda, so we would look at the second item on the consent agenda. And if then there's no discussion or wanting to yank those out, then we just vote on the whole consent agenda.
So the second item is the request appropriation of donated funds in the fall 21 library trust fund budget.
I guess I need to pull that item from the consent agenda because I do need to talk about some corrections.
Okay, so that item is pulled.
Well, Inga, are they big time corrections or just little things that could be where this item could be, tweaked?
Well, so the amount is incorrect and the time period that it covers is incorrect. So I'm not sure how significant that is.
Well, I think if you're just correcting what we could blame Francesca and say they're typos or something, and then just
No,
all right, well, then we'll pull it.
we'll pull it from the consent agenda, and then we vote on the consent agenda as it is.
I'll move for the consent agenda, including item number 1, but excluding item number 2.
I'll second that. Second.
Okay.
Okay, so moved. Anything else? We're good?
Well, did we vote?
Yeah.
No. So Trustee Joshi.
Agreed.
Trustee Petty.
Here, yes, aye.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Aye.
Chair Moreau.
Aye. Okay, now the item that Inga just pulled is now on the floor.
Okay, so this was an item to recommend that you request that the City Council appropriate a donation that was received. And the amount of the donation is listed as $11,300, but it's actually $12,169. And that is because it covers the time period of 28 weeks for 10 hours a week of a fund development position's time. And I had actually originally said it was for 26 weeks. So I was looking at an earlier draft of the wish list request. This was a wish list request that went to the Friends. The Friends approved it and donated the funds, but I had looked at an old version when I wrote the report.
Okay. So any comments or questions on this? Okay, do we have a motion to approve it? Jim?
I did just want to make one comment, and that was simply to thank the Friends and Foundation for making this donation. I think this is very timely to try to have an adequate from our coordinator, and I think that'll be very useful to have her available more closer to, what is it, 23 hours a week than the 13 hours. So I appreciate they're doing that. I'd be glad to make a motion to approve the corrected staff report.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Okay. I guess we vote on that one too.
Yes, Trustee
At this
Joshi.
point, in theory, you would ask if there were any comments from the public about the motion on which we were about to vote.
So now we wait, and we have to wait to see if anybody's there.
If Francesca is going to open the door and see if any public member walks in.
Yes, so for any viewers watching, it is best to follow this meeting on the YouTube channel as it has the shortest delay. You can follow on youtube.com/City of Monterey. To comment, please dial 831-225-0330. Enter the ID number 1927648, followed by the pound sign. And again, this is for either of the consent items, or if you would like to make a public comment for an item that's not on the agenda, which will be coming up shortly. The phone number again is 831-225-0330. The ID number is 1927648, followed by the pound sign. Chair Moreau, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. I would be happy to write a letter on behalf of the board to the friends and thank them, or Harish, maybe you can just unofficially thank them at the next meeting from us for this donation. Thank you. Okay, so the next thing is that we move on to the new business, since we've already just asked it.
We have to vote.
Oh,
We have to vote on the last thing.
yeah, right. Thank you.
Trustee Joshi,
Aye.
Trustee Petty,
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson. I can see you. Your speaker is off.
My apologies. Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Moreau.
Aye. Okay, so now we can move on to new business. Yes, and the first item of new business is a report on the Monterey Public Library Friends and Foundation activity.
Marcia, if I could, I believe you skipped over public comments in general.
I thought we just had public comments.
Well,
No, the public
What I
comments
had-
you just had was about that specific motion.
Okay.
Now they get to come on anything that's not on the agenda.
except I had noted in that last, I'm not sure if you caught that I had said for the consent items or any item not on the agenda, so that we could merge it into one, and there were no callers. If you'd like me to announce it again, I can.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine. Okay, so now we can move on to the report on the Monterey Public Library Friends and Foundation activities. Harish is our representative.
There, I'll do it. Here we go. I'm going to read so I don't fumble my lines. Okay. Board of Trustees members Harish Joshi and Marcia Morrow attended the Friends and Foundation board meeting on July 8th. Marcia announced that Harish would be replacing her as the Board of Trustees liaison, with Jim Thompson as an alternate member. Marcia presented a report from the BOT meeting. The main item was that Ralph Whitmore had elected to not continue as a board member. So his seat is now open. Marcia invited any Friends and Foundation member interested in applying to do so. The Friends and Foundation board discussed fundraising vision in light of the restrictions due to COVID-19. They discussed doing a virtual chocolate and wine event in February. For one board member, such virtual events have had mixed reception, with one having only a dozen attendees while another raising $5,000. It's all over the place. The board decided to postpone the in-person chocolate and wine event to fall of 2021, assuming there is no recurrence, or we're able to do it. There was discussion about sending recommendation to the city council for raising the transit occupancy tax. At issue was whether such activities would endanger the charitable organization, the 501(c). Well, 503(c)? The board was present to the alternative classification, 501(h), which would allow spending resources for such activities. The board decided to send the letter of support with a legal opinion before any further involvement in the matter. And that is the report. Thank you.
If I may add a few things, Harish, I sent you an email, but maybe you didn't get it. There were a few other things that I thought I would mention. One is the Ad Hoc Steering Committee for the transition from Friends to Friends and Foundation has been disbanded because the work is finished, and they thanked everyone for their hard work, and this committee is no longer in existence. Also, they established two new committees. One's called the Fund Development Committee, which is going to look for funding, and the Vision Committee, which is going to kind of look ahead and plan and try to get a sense of where the group is going. So those committees were established. They established a new board member orientation that they talked about. And there have been a few new board members, and that orientation, I believe, was held last week for the new members. And finally, there's a new website for the organization called www.investinmpl.org. And Doug Holtzman invited everyone to look at that website. So those are additional. I think it's useful for us to have feedback, to hear what the Friends are doing, so that we can have a closer relationship. The board can have a closer relationship with them. So, I think we'll do it quarterly. Whenever the board meets, we'll then have the next time we'll have that report. And Inga, maybe you want to add something because you were there as well.
Yes, so I wanted to add a couple of things. So one is that, of course, the Friends and Foundation is very concerned about funding support for the library, and so they're going to be working with you and with me on a recovery campaign, and that will be probably over 18 months, and the focus will especially be on collections, because they know that our community is very interested in being able to borrow materials from the library. And then as sort of a subset, there'll be different projects, and one of them is the MC Gives campaign. So that's an annual campaign where a nonprofit can do fundraising in November and December under the umbrella of it's the MC Weekly and the Monterey County, what is it? Foundation, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. The Community Foundation for Monterey County, thank you, and the Monterey Peninsula Foundation. So they're, the Friends need to have a big idea to apply, and of course they haven't been accepted yet into this campaign, but they are going to apply, and the big idea is to focus on how to support families, parents and children during this pandemic, now that they're having to do schoolwork from home. So what kinds of resources, what kinds of tools do families need for learning from home? So that's going to be their main focus, and it will include collections of materials, but also probably some learning kits for kids. So that's going to be their big idea. And that was what came to mind for me. Mary Jane was there as well, I believe. Mary Jane, is there anything that you can think of that we haven't covered between the three of us?
No, I think the three of you caught everything. Quite a bit of ground was covered.
Thank you.
Any other comments or feedback on that report? Great. Okay, thank you, Harish. There's no action on that. The next one is receive the quarterly trust fund report.
Okay, So this again is a report that had an error in it, but it's I think a little bit more minor error. So, but basically the idea of the report is there's a trust fund budget that the Library Board of Trustees requests and that the council approves. And then each quarter we report on how much new revenue came into the trust fund and then what have we spent funds on. And so in this report, it's the fourth quarter that we're reporting on, and on packet page 12, on the first chart, I accidentally had it say third quarter, but it really is the fourth quarter. So all revenue that we received during this fourth quarter of the year was $8,456. And I would say that that was actually pretty good considering that we were closed during that time period. So year to date, the revenues that were received into the trust fund are $285,028.80. And that was especially large because of a bequest that we received to the trust fund this year. As far as expenditures go, the amount expended during the fourth quarter was $36,862. And for the year, we expended $114,398.88. We always like to look at what the trust fund balance is. And so that's the next chart. We have a bequest, the Aller Trust, to replace our bookmobile. And so at this point, the value of that trust at the end of the year was $166,772.90. And then the other value of the trust fund money that isn't part of that trust is $386,798.11, bringing our total for the trust fund to just over $550,000. So then the report has a couple of additional charts, but if anybody had any questions at this point, I could stop and answer them. I won't go through, yes, so Trustee Petty.
You're muted, Bob. Bob, you're muted. Can't hear you.
There we go.
Okay,
Can you hear me now? In the second chart, Inga, where it looks at the balances, is the
Yes.
top of the first column, should it be 3/31/2019?
so that column shouldn't actually be there. I'm sorry. So I would just strike that column.
Okay, so the one that totals 550,108, take that column out?
Correct. Yes.
Because I was figuring that maybe it went up a little from 550 to 553 because of interest earned or something like that. But that's why I was looking at the date as maybe should have been 2019.
Right. So that actually, I believe that was the value at the close of 3/31/2020, but that didn't need to be there because we're talking
Okay.
about the fourth quarter. Yeah.
So should it just be changed to 630? But that would be the
No.
same as the next one. So
Right.
the numbers won't jive.
It should just be deleted.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll note that correction then.
Yes, thank you. So then the next couple of pages have a couple of charts. I won't go through each line, but the basic idea is what funds came in revenue for specific purposes, and then what had we budgeted to spend, and of what we budgeted to spend, how much did we spend? So those are the two charts. There's a revenue status report, and then there's a expenditure status report.
Any questions?
Any questions about that? I would just say generally we underestimate how much revenue we're going to take in, and then we overestimate how much we think we're going to spend in a year, just to be conservative. Then the next section of the report focuses on our fund development program, and we usually provide quite detailed narrative there, and that's because fund development work is paid for through the trust fund. So we want you to see what those dollars went towards, what kinds of activities those dollars went towards. And I appreciate that Mary Jane Perna prepared this section of the report and lists all the great things that she's been working on for us. That first chart is interesting in that it shows you how much came in to the endowment fund and for the year. And because we are following Library Strategy's recommendation where we're not focusing on the endowment fund, but rather we're focusing on major gifts, you'll see that it was $2,655. The total for the trust fund in gifts, restricted and unrestricted, $7,000, almost $8,000. And then the Friends and Foundation during this last quarter raised $3,340. So the total that came in during this quarter was $13,723, and that was actually more, 35% more than last year when we were open. So we're doing pretty well there. Footnote 1 shows the present value, or the value as of March. Well, yeah, the present value of the endowment fund, which is just over $300,000. That's the fund that's held with the community foundation. And then the amount that we took in for the trust fund included a small bequest that we received from the Rosalind Flyer Survivors Trust. So were there any questions about that section of the report?
I think at one point we were wondering, and I'm not sure if we formally asked you to call the community foundation or not, and much as the city is tapping into its reserve fund to cover the decrease in revenue and the budget, we were wondering if endowment fund money could be, because it's essentially a reserve fund, could be tapped in any way. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to find that out yet.
So actually, Jim Thompson communicated with the community foundation and communicated back to us. And in the Ad Hoc Funding Committee, Library Funding Committee report, there's a recommendation concerning that.
Oh, good. Okay.
And just to clarify, so I like to think of the endowment fund as they're really permanent funds donated to the endowment, and it's a certain percentage that we're able to, of earnings that you, the library board, could request be spent each year. So, but wait for that report.
I will be happy to patiently wait for the other committee's report.
Okay, so just highlight of activities in the fund development arena during this third quarter. The spring appeal went forward, and that had been something that we had kind of wondered about because, you know, everything was so uncertain and people's lives were all kind of on pause. Was this really a good time to be asking people to make a gift? But we went forward with it. We sent out gift letters to 700 current and former donors, including people who attend the wine and chocolate event. We hadn't included those folks in our appeals before, or intentionally included them before. And that appeal did quite well, raised $5,000 with just 37 gifts. So that's an average of $135 per gift compared to last year, which raised just slightly more and was about $73 per gift. So that appeal went well. And then it focused on California History Room. So we received some gifts for California History Room, but a lot of people said, you know, I don't want to restrict it. However, you can put it to use to help the library at this time. Please, you know, use it in that way. So as far as finding new folks and cultivating new folks, so our assistant city manager had the great idea of, once we reopened, to include a letter in each item that was checked out through our sidewalk service, letting people know our financial situation and thanking them for using the library, and then letting them know that if they wanted to support us, that they could make a gift to the Friends and Foundation. And I think that's been, you know, people have been making gifts to their website. So I think that was fairly successful. In terms of stewardship, so we wanted to let the folks who gave to Monterey County Gives last year know what sorts of things we were able to do, even though we were closed. So we sent them all a email letting them know that funds from MC Gives last year were used to purchase books that were then distributed at those lunch sites that MPUSD, the school district, had set up, so that children, when the libraries were all closed in our region, children still had access to books. And that was something that the school superintendent said, if there's some way you can get books into kids' hands, you know, that would be a great way to help. And so funds from that campaign were used in that way. So also we kept the new members of the Fund Development Committee apprised of what was going on with closure and that sort of thing. So we kept them up to date. Under communications and strategy, this first bullet mentions that Mary Jane and I worked on this concept of a recovery campaign to help the Friends launch their big project. And we helped a lot with the, and I should say Mary Jane helped a lot with the new website that the Friends created that Marcia mentioned, which is the investinmpl.org. And so if you haven't gone to that website, I would encourage you to do so. It not only has copies of recent e-blasts that the library has sent out and so forth, but it has information about how to join the Friends and how to make various kinds of gifts. And so it's a good website to look at. Then we also worked on a 90-minute program to orient new Friends and Foundation directors. And we did hold, and I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but we did hold an orientation not only for 2 new members of the Friends and Foundation board, but any Friends and Foundation board members who said, yeah, I could use a refresher, or I would love to sort of be a guinea pig, and then give you feedback on the orientation. So that went well. And let's see, we had a meeting with the Friends and Foundation president and vice president, and the CEO of the Community Foundation, and myself. And we wanted to let them know about our idea for a recovery campaign and hear back from him about any suggestions he had as a 501c3, you know, because of this unusual time with COVID-19, any feedback he had about doing a campaign like that. And it was a useful, it was a productive meeting. And then under administrative operations, Mary Jane did a really helpful thing, which Jim might want to comment on, I don't know, analyzing some data for us, because one of our questions was what percentage of the gifts that the library receives over the past several years have come from people who live within our strict city limits, and then what about our surrounding area? And, you know, what do those percentages look like? And so Mary Jane did some analysis and came up with some interesting numbers, which is that a lot of people make gifts who don't live in Monterey. Jim, did you want to say anything about that?
No, I'll touch on that a little bit under the funding committee report because it's discussed in more detail there.
Okay, thank you. And then as far as other expenditures from the trust fund, in collection development, we, the Friends had helped us with our subscription to Hoopla Digital this past quarter, and we appreciated their help underwriting that program. We have decided to discontinue it at the end of this month. It's just very expensive, and that's a service that provides streaming digital and audiobooks and ebooks, music, and graphic novels that people can access remotely. But it's such an expensive service given the current financial situation. We didn't really see it as something that could be sustained. And so we're transitioning to a less expensive program where hopefully the main thing that people have used it for is audiobooks and ebooks to read on tablets and so forth. So we're transitioning to another product that's much less expensive that hopefully has thousands of items that people will want to borrow. So we'll see how that goes. For the California History Room, trust funds were used for an offsite storage locker. And so I went over to that offsite storage locker, emptied it out, and turned in the key. So we don't have that storage locker anymore. Just didn't seem like a good expenditure in this climate with every penny counting. Under special services, we used a little bit of trust fund money to do some adult programs. There was a virtual mindfulness program, and then we printed some flyers for programs that had been held in the previous quarter, but the charges came in this quarter. And then under teen services, we purchased prizes for our teen summer reading program. And under youth services, we purchased prizes for the children's program, and then also purchased software so that folks could participate in summer reading online, following along through this software. And that was through a really generous gift from some local supporters, very kind supporters. And then finally, under reader services, during the last quarter, the activity there was expenditures from a grant that we had received from the California State Library to run the Zip Books program. And that's a program where customers are able to request books, and then we order them from Amazon and send them directly to the person's home. And that was a really popular service when we were completely closed. It's a popular service anyway, but it was particularly helpful during that shelter in place, the initial shelter in place. And sadly, next fiscal year, not the current one we're in, but next fiscal year, the governor had not funded the Zip Book program. That could change, but it looks like at this point it's not funded. But we did just receive today an email saying that we've gotten our allotment of $6,500 for this fiscal year to continue that program. So we're really pleased that we'll be able to do that, because with our acquisitions budget in the general fund having been zeroed out, we have no funding for materials. And so receiving the grant from the state library will help us be able to deliver some materials to people. And then meanwhile, the Friends are working on a campaign to help raise money for materials as well. So that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
I just had one question. I don't know, maybe
Sure.
for you or for Mary Jane. Do you have some time frame for when the recovery campaign is going to start? Have you decided?
Inga, maybe we could just say that we are on the, we think we will very soon have a first meeting date nailed down for the Fund Development Committee of the Friends and Foundation Board. and it's probably going to be on August 20th. So I think the idea would be that they'd be able to bless some decisions and provide some feedback, and that we could get going
In September.
September.
Yeah. Right now it's for those people who have been members of the Friends, it's time to renew people's memberships. So we wanted to get that mailing out also, so that we have that strong base of those supporters signed up.
And that mailing went out? Not yet.
It's going out next week.
Right, it's going out next week. It turns out that designing new stationery by committee took a little bit of time, but that is all. The ship is coming in on Monday at the latest.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, two quick ones. Inga. You referred to working with Nat to, reading your report, create colorful flyers promoting charitable giving distributed to everyone who picked up books on the sidewalk service.
Mhm.
That has happened, or it's ongoing, or it's going to happen?
During the month of June, we were distributing those flyers in every item, and then we haven't continued grinding out those colorful flyers, but we have used that same graphic and same content in some of the e-blasts, including the citywide e-blast that went out last week, I believe.
The reason I ask about it is because maybe I didn't check out enough books in June or something. I don't know if every single book that was checked out in June got one of those, but I just didn't recall seeing it in any of the books that I may have checked out in June.
So what we're gonna do is we're working on a bookmark that
you took the words right off the tip of my tongue. I was going to say there's that little slip of paper in every book that's been on hold, forever, that says, whose book it is. And what do you normally do with that? You either throw it away or maybe you use it as a bookmark. But I was just going to say an inexpensive, cheaply made out of regular paper. It doesn't have to be colorful, but just big letters so people see what the key words are, as a bookmark in each one of those things we give out. So great, we're on the same page. And the other question I had is, I know Kim is working on this. Do you know what product we are looking at getting to replace Hoopla? Has that been chosen yet?
It has been chosen, and it's called Cloud Library.
So that's what Cloud Library on the front homepage of the website is all about.
Right.
So it's available as well as Hoopla right now.
So we're having kind of a soft rollout, and then we'll do more publicity around it. The exciting thing about Cloud Library is it is something that libraries from all over the state have joined, and they share their ebooks so that customers, for instance, will have access to maybe San Diego County's ebooks or Los Angeles County's ebooks. So much, much larger systems that have way more titles than we are able to purchase. Those resources will be available to our customers by our belonging to this new service. And the idea is that if we have books that nobody's checked out, ebooks that nobody's checked out, then the people in San Diego would be able to borrow them. But meanwhile, if they have books in San Diego that their customers haven't checked out, we'll be able to, our customers can borrow them. So I think Kim is sitting in quietly on this meeting if she wanted to chime in and correct anything that I've said about the service. I see a big K on my screen, but she's not chiming in, so okay. We'll learn more and provide some training for the public when we're doing more campaigning about it.
Also, you still have Libby is on there as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that Libby is the first ebook program that we offered, Northern California Digital Libraries, which is a good program. The challenge some people have had is the wait times can be very long. The nice thing about Hoopla was that there weren't wait lists, so you were always able to find something that you could check out immediately using Hoopla. And we're hoping that people will have a similar experience in Cloud Library, but we'll see how that goes.
Great. Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay. Yeah.
I'd just like to mention that I thought it was a very good, thorough report and quite a bit going on during a pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that concludes the new business for today. So now we move on to the old business, which is a report. First item is the report from the Ad Hoc Planning Committee. And that Bob is going to deliver that with input from Inga and Marcia as necessary.
Okay, well, the three of us, Inga, Marcia, and I have met several times, and in the agenda packet is the revised reopening approach schematic that Inga first gave us probably like 2 months or so ago, and we've modified it. And so, the key thing is that we are in phase 1.5, which is kind of like initial phase 1 on a little bit of steroids, and we are able to do a lot more. And the statistics and the numbers that aren't all in the agenda packet, but I will ask Inga to relay some of those. And if you want to see some of it in graph form and pie diagram form and everything, Inga did provide those to Marcia and me. And I'm sure if there are any things that you want to see, we could do that for Harish and Jim as well. But the number of people who are being served with this sidewalk service, my personal opinion is just astounding. I mean, it's blowing my mind, and I think it's one of those things that even if in the distant future we're able to reopen and people can actually walk inside the building, some form of this kind of sidewalk put on hold pickup service might be a desirable thing to continue, because it sure has worked well. And and it would be a way of consistently getting those bookmarks we talked about a second ago into everybody's hands as well. So phase 2, which does provide for some limited internal accessibility of the building, even though it may not seem like a big step beyond phase 1.5, it really will be. And as we are constantly reminded by the governor and our city manager, we don't have the permission to do that yet. So the emphasis that we have decided upon, the planning committee and Inga, is to, well, let's assume that we're as far as we're going to go for a long time in terms of checking out materials. Let's work on beefing up and expanding the remote virtual kinds of programs and offerings that we have, so that we have more programs and services offered even while staying in phase 1.5 and not having to go to the added time and effort and staffing just to keep the inside clean and sanitary, let alone actually providing library services. So that will be kind of the main expansion of our emphasis now, is to work on those sorts of things. Possibly we will see if we can tap into the added staff portion of phase 2, not to open the doors, but to have more professional staff available to do the planning of these additional remote and virtual programs. That's something that we wouldn't, for example, ask a library assistant to do. We would need somebody with more expertise, and so we may tap into the staff at the next level, if not, but not the opening of the library, so that we can provide more services. So I will leave it with that and ask Inga if she wants to share any specific numbers that will, all of which will support all of the glowing things I just said about how much we're doing.
Okay, so thank you so much. So I'll just bring you up to date. The number of items that have been checked out since we started our service 32 days ago is about 12,000 items. And then we have a chart. I guess I'm actually looking at, it's similar to the, I'm just looking at the updated numbers for the chart that's listed on packet page. I'm looking for the packet page number. So it's packet page 24.
24?
Oh, there you go. There you go. Look at that. So, so Nat actually has taken the great data that David Kuhn, our technology services specialist, has captured, and using this great Google platform has created these great charts. So there we go. That's what our current usage looks like. And it's interesting to note the percentage when you look at where people reside who use their library cards here. You'll see that 41.8% are Monterey residents and 26% live elsewhere in the county, 27.6% live in Pacific Grove. And that just illustrates, as Hans Usler said earlier today in his meetings with the manager, just what a hub our library continues to be for our region. And I'm always encountering people who have these interesting stories. They might work for the city in some pretty important positions in the city, but they don't live in the city, and or they work in Monterey and they live far away, and they so they list their home address, but they actually spend most of their time in Monterey. So it is true that since we're such a big draw for employment here in our city, we get a lot of people who use the library because that's where they spend most of their time. Were there any other charts that, any particular charts that you wanted, Bob, you were thinking of that I could share, or otherwise?
I just wanted to mention that in his speech this morning, his talk this morning, Hans mentioned the figure 10,000. So we're way above that. And he had a joke that said maybe we should charge Pacific Grove for the sidewalk space in front of our library.
Yeah. So it continues to be a really popular service. We have this past week, we've issued over 60 new library cards. People continue to apply for library cards so that they can access online services as well as using the physical services. And we also have a lot of things that we're relying heavily on our volunteer crew to help pull materials for people so that we can have them ready when people show up to pick up their materials. So it's we're barely keeping up with the demand, and it's exciting to see how much demand there is. And we do have a relationship with Pacific Grove where we're able to borrow their materials, and their customers are able to pick up materials here at our location. So we have a transportation that goes between the two buildings twice a week. Okay, thank you.
I did, wait, are we finished with this presentation, or are you asking for additional?
Yeah, but hey, is everybody there? My whole thing disappeared.
Oh, we're here.
Huh, okay, well,
You can
I'll try it again. It said that the message I got there's a whole screen just totally disappeared, and it said the connection was lost. So I wasn't sure if it was my connection or our connection with Google or what, but I'm trying to do it again.
You can participate by phone if you'd like.
Yeah, right. This sounds very clear,
Yeah, this is.
Okay.
You can do that.
clearer than.
Oh, but I miss seeing your faces.
I did want to add, and then Marcia, I know you wanted to say something. I wanted to add that when we looked together at our planning for the future and looked at reopening, there's a concern that if we go to a model where people make appointments and we allow them into the library, we'll be serving fewer people initially than we're serving right now, because we'll need to screen everybody, take their temperature, record their name and phone number, and then limit the amount of time they can spend in the building, and then have them leave and do some cleaning before we have another round of people coming in. And unfortunately, it looks like right now, the best way to serve the most people with our really minimal staff on hand is to do the continuous sidewalk service and just try to do a really good job of that service. And also remote programs and providing e-resources to people.
Right. One of the things that we talked about, if I might add, in the planning is the fact that now that the school district, K-12, has definitely decided that all their students are going to be home and working online, it's really important for the library to work with the school districts and figure out what it is those resources are needed to help those kids be successful. This is no longer a question of maintenance and just keeping the kids busy for a couple of months. Looks like this entire grade year is going to be online, and those kids need resources and the teachers need resources, and they will turn to the library, no doubt. So really need to make sure the online program and also for after school work. The students don't come into the library anymore after school, but they're going to do something. And the question is, are they going to get on the library website and learn things, or are they going to just sit and play video games? And I think that it's really up to the library to step up and work with the school districts to provide that. I mean, there used to be school libraries. Every school used to have a little library and a librarian. I think those are relics of the past. And so I think a lot of the schools in Monterey are just going to rely on the Monterey Public Library. And we need to be able to step up to the plate for that. So, we really need somebody who understands children's programming, teen programming, really understands that. So I think that needs to be a point that we need to make moving into this phase.
That's right. Thank you. And I'm glad that the Friends, as their project with MC Gives, are focusing on how to support families and kids and teachers with this remote learning environment. Yeah.
Right. So it will be a nice partnership, I think. Jim.
Yeah, two things. One, I just wanted to comment that I strongly agree with the comments about trying to emphasize programming while we're doing the curbside service. I totally agree with that. And the second one is I'm still trying to understand a little bit more about the curbside service data. And if we could go back to that packet page 24 chart, that one that shows items checked out by jurisdiction, if that's easy to put up again, or I can just talk about it in any case. I had a question about that. There are two charts at the bottom of that page, and one of them has the time frame going from oldest to newest from left to right. And the other one is just the reverse, going left to right, newest to oldest. And I just, it occurred to me that maybe the data is mislabeled, or maybe it's correctly labeled and they're just then on different time frame spectrums. And I was wondering if anybody could clarify whether this is in fact correct, or if maybe the time frame has been reversed on one of these charts.
So is this the layout that you're looking at? This is the latest version of the numbers, so the numbers across the top are higher, but is that the comparable chart?
Yeah, I can't really see the bottom of it, but on the one that
Okay.
You're right. I see what you're saying, Jim. I think it's in the printout. I'm not sure how that happened in the packet. Is different than what we actually see, but you're right. It's supposed to be in chronological order, left to right, as you can see here in the screen share, where we start June 11th and we go all the way through to July 21st, which is the last set of data that we have here.
Okay, good.
So it's the labels that are wrong rather than the data bars.
The labels and the data bars are correct. It's sorted incorrectly. It's sorted in reverse chronological order in the printout that was the packet.
But it's correct for what it says.
It's correct for what it says. Yeah, each set of data is.
Okay,
So the labels aren't. It's not labeled incorrectly. It's just sorted incorrectly.
I see.
Yeah.
So
But
it's sort of a mirror of the other one.
So I was trying to look at this in this resident, non-resident question that we've been talking about a little bit. On the left side of the screen that I'm looking at right now, it looks like the Monterey percentage is a bit higher. So is that the older data or the newer data? That's the older data?
This is the latest data. Yeah, this is the newest data that updates on a daily basis.
Yeah. So the numbers on the left side of the graph are the most current numbers?
This graph, what you see here, all of this is updated and current.
It's updated daily.
But
So Jim, the one in the packet only went up to July 15th. The one that Nat has up there continues on. So on July 15th, there were only 9,500 books checked out cumulatively. And on this later one, it was 11,000 because it adds those extra days.
So the left side of the chart is the most recent data. Is that correct?
On the one, it's projected up here, yes.
Yeah. So it looks to me like the more recent data shows Monterey residents having a higher percentage of the total than in the earlier days. And if that is that correct?
I think it's the opposite. And the earlier days was 42.2, and here it's 41 point something. So it's almost negligible, but it's slightly smaller.
It was only one day where we had Monterey was 70.3%, but as you saw, that dropped to as low as 28% on some days of City of Monterey residents checking out items. It went back up to 52%, but your average is 41% of Monterey residents checking out items since we've reopened.
Yeah, well, but the reason I was asking is, and Inga, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was when we first started the curbside service, we were the only library, maybe in the county, doing so. And that since then, I think the county free library system is doing some, and maybe Carmel, and I think there's some other libraries that are doing maybe not as extensive as we are, but they are doing some. And I was just trying to understand if that would have impacted the percentage that we're experiencing.
Right. So you're correct that other libraries have started offering a service. None of the libraries are offering it 5 consecutive days a week. It's either 1 or 2 days a week. In the county's model, I believe there's the option of pick it up at a location or they'll mail it to the person. So they're providing, they're mailing out materials to people who live in the county. And in the past, that service was not available to Monterey residents, but because of COVID-19, if you're a Monterey resident, you can get a free county library card and have materials mailed to your home by the county. So I think everybody's trying to help all of the residents in the area as best as they can.
It's also the case that Pacific Grove Library is still closed completely. So it's the only library the Pacific Grove residents have.
Correct. So we have an arrangement with Pacific Grove where their customers can come to us and borrow materials, either that are sent over from Pacific Grove Library or our materials as well.
Do I understand there's a quid pro quo with that, that they're also paying for some things that saving us money? In other words, it's kind of a shared services arrangement where we're doing some things that benefit them and they're doing some things that benefit us, and that
That's right.
there's a trade-off there that's worth mentioning.
That's right. They're allowing us access to their cataloging software, which cost us last year $12,000 a year and had to be eliminated from our budget. So now they're not charging us to piggyback on their service, so that we're actually able to catalog either donated materials or materials that we're able to purchase with support from the friends.
Thank you for those clarifications.
Yeah, thank you.
And Harish,
Yes, a couple of questions. In this chart, the number of customers, are those each individual customer or multiple checkouts for the same customer content in multiple customers?
Great question. So it's not unique customers. And so when we say in the latest data, 3,169 customers have used the library, it could be a customer like you coming once a week, or it could be somebody who came once and hasn't come back. So either one. Yeah.
Okay, so it's individual customers. Okay. And the second question is, do you know when the Pacific Grove Library is going to open for their own? Because that will impact perhaps the chart on the left side that we see. And I'm wondering how value to put on the 27.8% number that I see there. If it's temporary, it affects the long-term implication.
Right. So they are in an awkward situation, which is that they were in the middle of renovating their facility when COVID hit, and they were in a temporary location. So now they're in the process of moving back to their almost complete renovated building, but meanwhile they've lost all their staff. So it looks like, well, they have 2 staff members. So it looks like perhaps September or October is when they might be moved back into their new facility and able to open. But then it's going to depend, of course, on the health restrictions, whether they're able to provide a curbside or sidewalk service like we're doing, where they're actually able to welcome people into the facility. I imagine once the facility is open, since it will be beautifully renovated, it will be very appealing for people who are looking for a library to spend some time in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
any other comments on this question? Okay, so we move on to the next item of business, which is to receive a report and approve the recommendations from the Ad Hoc Library Funding Committee.
And I believe Jim is going to do that report. And Jim, if you could turn up your volume just slightly.
You know, I was thinking that perhaps those of us who are not talking could mute, because there's a really big noise there when you want it. So maybe you could turn on, then we can hear you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay,
A
good.
little better now, yes.
Well, the committee was Harish and I, and we met a total of 6 times over the last 2 months, along with Inga, virtually, of course. And
Jim, your voice is very soft.
okay, let me try something different. Okay, can you hear me any better now?
That's a little better.
Okay. First, I'd like to start with the overall cover letter. The staff report indicates fiscal implications of this report are none, and that's actually not quite correct. We have 3 very specific recommendations, and 2 of them would have a direct fiscal impact. One would transfer $12,758 from the Endowment Fund to the Trust Fund, which we'll get to in a minute. And the other one would provide a savings of around $3,500 over 2 fiscal years from waiving of stipends. So it's not really correct to say there's no fiscal impact to this report. We'll get into that more later, but I just wanted to correct the record in that regard. So moving on, I'll just kind of go through fairly quickly the report. It's 8 pages. And then I'd suggest we come back to the 3 items where there's specific board action recommended. And we can talk about each of those in more detail, and also any other questions anybody has about anything in the report. So again, we started off back in early June after Chair Petty had appointed us to this committee to look primarily at potential auxiliary funding to help with the fiscal crisis that we were in, but also to potentially look at other cost savings ideas that we might be able to identify. So we looked at both ends of the spectrum, potential additional revenue as well as potential fiscal reductions that we might be able to identify. And so we had a combination of issues, like I said, a little over 20 ideas that we talked about. And several of them we are recommending, and there are 3 in particular that I'll get to later that we're actually recommending against, that may be worth talking about a little bit because they may come up from time to time. But with that, let me just kind of run through quickly the major ones here on starting on packet page 28. In terms of ideas for further consideration, as you probably know, there's a lot of discussion at the federal as well as the state level about funding for cities. And I won't go into too much detail about that, but I think the House of Representatives at the federal level approved something like $1 trillion of aid to cities and counties and perhaps states, but the U.S. Senate is nowhere near doing anything of the sort. And I think just this next week, we'll know more about whether there's going to be any funding that might come through from the federal level that might assist the city in general, which hopefully would by extension benefit the library. So again, that's really nothing we can impact, I don't think, very much. So I won't spend any more time on that one. The second one, of course, is the Reopening and Hiring Fund, which I believe has somewhere around $2.4 million in it at this point. And so hopefully as we firm up our plans for the reopening and maybe for programming, hopefully we can tap into that for things that are high priority and make sense from a citywide perspective. Again, I'm not sure it's worthwhile to, at this point, to talk further about that unless anyone has questions or wants to talk to Nat about that. The third one is an action item, and that's something the City Council has discussed quite a bit over the last month, including at the council meeting this past Tuesday, which is a potential increase in the hotel tax, actually called the transient occupancy tax. And my understanding from last Tuesday's council meeting is there appeared to be pretty much of a consensus to go with placing a 2% increase in the TOT on the November ballot. So it may be a little, in some senses, a little late for us to be giving our comments on that. But since there may well be some concern expressed by the hotel industry about a TOT increase, I nonetheless would suggest that it's probably worth us authorizing Chair Mora to send a letter to the City Council indicating our support for such a ballot measure. And there's a draft of such a letter attached to this report. I believe it's on packet page 35. So we can come back to that, but that is an action item that the committee recommends, is that the board authorize the chair to send that letter or some similar letter. Item 4 is one that we actually talked about a little bit earlier on a previous item where Bob had a question about the Endowment Fund. And I will spend just a minute on this one. Or I'm sorry, no, that's a later item. I'm sorry, I'm confused. That's item 6. Item 4 is really just to support the new Friends and Foundation as they're getting going with their fund development committee. And in particular, Harish and I thought their use of crowdfunding as a fundraising technique was a good idea. And that we're hoping that they can enhance their book sales once either conditions allow or perhaps online. And that for their recovery campaign that we would encourage matching grants and donation challenges, which are things that I believe they're already thinking of. So those are mainly just to encourage them to continue the good work that they're already embarked upon. And then 5th is potential grant opportunities that the director is already tracking. And again, we would encourage applying for any grants that seem to be helpful in this regard. And there may be some additional ones coming at the federal level, possibly. That remains to be seen, but certainly encourage that. Then item number 6 is the one that I was starting to get into before, which is the endowment fund item. And that one I will spend a minute on because it is a little confusing. The endowment fund, which is currently a little over $300,000, as Inga mentioned earlier, is basically a permanent fund, and we can't really take, much money out of that, but they do structure it in a way that we could do a annual payment from the endowment fund that is basically a number that's calculated based on the balance of the fund and the previous, I believe it's 2 years earnings of the fund. And it currently works out to about 4.5% of the balance that they use in their calculations. And again, that's the most you can take out of the endowment fund is basically the annual share of the investment of what you have in the fund. You couldn't actually spend it all. Even in a fiscal emergency, you couldn't spend it down to zero. It's set up in a way that all you can do is get that annual payment. And the board has in the past chosen not to take that annual payment because our goal was to try to make the endowment fund larger and larger so that the amount that we could get out of it would be more substantive after a number of years. But now is not a normal time, as we all know. And so we think it makes sense to do an annual payment this year, 2020, which would be approximately $12,758 that would go from the endowment fund to the trust fund. And we talked about maybe doing that for a couple of years because this may well go on for a while, but we didn't really have a consensus on that. And we thought it was better to basically recommend that we ask for one payment later in 2020 and then revert to the default position of having the money reinvested each year into the endowment fund. And then later on this year or early next year, the board could the Board of Trustees could reconsider whether we wanted to take another annual payment, which would, and normally they're made in March. So we could do another one in March of 2021 if the board decided to do that. But at this point, the committee is simply recommending we take just one annual payment, which would be made probably a month or so after we took action as a board. We need a formal majority vote to approve that. And as part of that, we would recommend that the Community Foundation be informed that after that one payment, that we would revert back to the reinvestment model unless we take subsequent action later to ask for another payment in March. So I hope that's relatively clear, but we can come back to that more for discussion. Then item number 7 is actually the third action item, and that has to do with waiving the trustee stipends. And as you probably recall, we talked about this briefly at the May 22 library board meeting, and there was kind of informal comments by all of the board members indicating a willingness to waive their stipends. But later, when we were talking about that, we discovered that there seemed to be some ambiguity. Some people thought that was referring to the stipends for service during fiscal year 1920, and some thought it was for service in 2021. And after some discussion, we decided to recommend that the trustees waive the stipends for both fiscal years. So anybody that thought it was 1 year would be right, and anybody that thought it was the other year would also be right. They would just be doubling it. So anyway, we can get back and talk about that more as well, but that's the third action item that we have. Then item number 8 is more of a listing of 11 other ideas that we talked about, some revenue raising and some cost reductions. And we didn't really come up with a strong recommendation on those. And in fact, on 1 or 2, we actually had some disagreement among the committee and couldn't reach a full consensus. And we decided that those we thought were worth looking at further, and we would recommend they be referred to staff for further analysis. And some of them, it's more of a timing question, and some of them, it just needs a little bit more staff work. So it involves things like expanding the merchandise in the library store, which of course would be pretty minimal in terms of the revenue. But again, we're looking for any dollars we can. B is the potential for renting out the rooms like the community room. And that has a number of challenges with it, but we still thought that was worth looking at further. C is an issue of providing a new service, a passport service that some cities are doing either out of their library, or I know in some cities it's actually out of the city clerk's office. that's one that we think might make sense, but we think now is not the right time. We don't have the staff to do it. People aren't traveling, Americans aren't even allowed to go to Europe at this point, at least in most cases. So we thought that it didn't make any sense at all to pursue that at this point, but we think it is something worth revisiting in the future. D is another item we can't really do anything with right now, but it was an idea that perhaps the Monterey Public Library could be used as a polling location and get some funding from the county for doing that. And if that were allowed, then it might also be an opportunity for the Friends and Foundation to be poll workers, and perhaps they'd be willing to donate the stipend that they would receive to the Friends and Foundation. So it might be some funding for the city or the library and some funding for the Friends and Foundation. But again, they don't need any for the November election, so it's not a ripe issue for now, but we think it would be worth looking at for the next election that is held locally. E is kind of a surprising one. I didn't even know that the Monterey Public Library had an oil well, or at least some sort of mineral interests in a small piece of property in Texas. And we don't really think it's probably worth that much, but we think it's worth exploring. If we can find someone that knows anything about mineral rights and oil wells and that kind of thing, it might be a wonderful volunteer opportunity if we could find someone that has some background in that area to try to discover if that is of any significant value or not. And if so, obviously to try to get some revenue from that. So that again needs some further work. F is charging for some types of programming. This is a very controversial issue for a public library. And our thought was that the Friends and Foundation is probably in a better position to do that sort of thing like they already do for the wine and chocolate event. And they also do some requests for donations at some of their author series. So we thought that was worth some further focus, working with the Friends and Foundation to maybe try to come up with some other types of programming that they might be able to sponsor and help get some revenue for. So that's something, again, we'd like to ask staff to work with them on that. G is another controversial one where we might charge for services like holds. And we had quite a bit of discussion on that. And again, we didn't reach agreement on that. And so we asked that staff look at that further and come back to the entire board with a recommendation on that issue. H is one that we actually already talked about previously, to try to find less expensive alternatives for certain services. And Hoopla was the one that we focused on in particular. And of course, in this case, the staff's already moving to terminate that service. I believe it's August 1 and replace it. So that's actually already well in process. I is further use of volunteers. There are some restraints on when we can use volunteers and when we can't. But we think staff is using them more now for the curbside service, and we just encourage that whenever possible. We think about that as a possible source that might help reduce our costs. J and K are interesting items that we also talked about quite a bit. J is the idea of consolidating or sharing services with other libraries, with the consolidating being more the idea of merging or creating a joint powers authority or some major change like that. And actually about 10 years ago, at the time that the city of Monterey, as well as the city of Pacific Grove, and later the city of Carmel merged our fire departments, we also looked at the possibility of merging libraries with Pacific Grove. And at the same time, we also looked at merging building inspection services. And of those three, two of them were actually implemented, the fire service and the building inspection, but not the library. And I was actually personally involved at the time when I was still working as a part-time deputy city manager. And at that time, the cost savings for the library service consolidation just wasn't anything like what it was for building inspection or fire service. And therefore, at that time, the cost savings didn't seem to merit all the difficulty that's involved in merging departments and dealing with, one city probably absorbing the staff of another and all that sort of thing, which can be quite complex. And so at that point, we decided not to pursue it for library services, even though we did for the other two services. And at this point, we're not aware of anything that would really change that overall conclusion. So at this point, the committee isn't suggesting that we spend time focused on consolidating with other libraries in terms of a merger. But we do think, as we already talked about a little bit before, there are opportunities for shared services where one library might focus on one thing and another library on a different thing, and they could kind of broker a trade of sorts in terms of services. Or it could even be that one library specializes in something and the other pays them to do that for them. It could be either type of arrangement. And there are several of those sorts of things that are already going on. And we would encourage staff to look for more of those sorts of things. And of course, the idea of 6 area libraries combining catalogs is something the staff's already looking at. And again, we would encourage that sort of thing to be continued. And we think that's a more productive use of staff time than to revisit the idea of consolidating services with other cities for library service. Similarly, item number K, there's kind of 2 parts to that. One would be contracting out all of library service to a private sector firm. And there is 1 and possibly 2 firms that do that sort of thing, and have a few libraries in California that actually provide library service through a private sector firm. From the research that we did, though, those were libraries that had been part of a county library system, and they were dissatisfied with the county library service they were receiving and wanted to create their own service. So they didn't have their own city library and then switched to a private firm to provide library services. They had never had a library of their own. They had a county library service, and then when they created their own, they contracted it out instead of creating a library staff, and so on. And we found that there were some problems with that. That they tend to not pay very well, and they have a high level of turnover, and so they don't have very good institutional knowledge and quite as much in-depth knowledge of local needs and maybe the cultural needs or the historical needs of a particular jurisdiction. And they tend to do things more from a national perspective, even in terms of things like what books to buy and things like that. They would probably have more of a national perspective than they would paying a lot of attention to the local needs or the local desires. And there were some other considerations. In fact, one large city, Santa Clarita, had a private sector firm providing their library service for several years, and they were pretty unhappy with it. And so they, I believe it was the year before last, they terminated their contract and created their own library staff. So again, there's pros and cons to that. It can be a less expensive alternative, but from what I can gather, I think it would probably be a lower quality of service. And so we don't really recommend that. But we do think that there may be certain aspects of the MPL operations that may be worth further exploration for contracting out a very specific service. And an example of that is cataloging and processing of new materials. And we would recommend that staff focus on some of those sorts of things, but that we not seriously consider contracting out the entire library function. So those are the ideas, at least part of which we do recommend staff to pursue further. But there are 3 that we felt fairly strongly that we recommended against. And I'll just quickly go through the first 2 of those, and then I'll talk about the third one a little bit longer. The first one is any sort of advertising or sponsoring of products or services sold in the library. I mean, we could have big video screens with various types of advertisements going on in the library, or maybe at the curbside while we're doing curbside service. Or you could even rent out the community room, for example. There are some places that, for financial, some company that's trying to sell you annuities, or maybe a hearing aid company that wants you to help them sell hearing aids. You could have services like that some people might perceive as being neutral, but they're actually commercial activities. And we thought that would just kind of be improper for the library to be perceived as being overly commercial. It's almost like getting into a form of censorship in a different fashion. So we were just very uncomfortable with the idea of advertising or sponsoring of commercial activities directly in the library. The second one is charging fees to Monterey residents. I'm not sure anybody's very seriously proposed that one. But from the research that Inga has found, it looks like it might actually not be legal as long as you're a public library. The state law appears to say you serve residents free of charge. So our understanding is that we couldn't do that and still call it a public library. I suppose we could, and as noted here, it might require a charter amendment, but conceivably you could transition the Monterey Public Library into a private library and charge fees or something. But to us, it just didn't make a lot of sense to go there. So we didn't spend a lot of time on that issue, and we would recommend against that. Thirdly is a little more complicated one. That's charging fees to non-residents. And that could be done. That's clearly not illegal. It does raise some ethical questions and some questions about organizations that we might be kicked out of or banned from participating in, because again, it kind of goes against the grain of the philosophy of public libraries. But it can be done, and in fact, it was done in Monterey back in 1992 through 2006. And it generated during that period, from what we can find in the records, around $40,000 per year of revenue from non-residents. We don't know what it would generate now. Back in those days, the charge was $50 a year or $5 a month, but with discounts to $15 a year for children's or seniors. So you could conceivably think of a higher charge than that, in which case maybe you could get some additional revenue than the $40,000 that they got in those days. But we also think that there are some other circumstances that might actually tend to lower the revenue that we might receive. Because since then, we haven't really improved the library very much, the Monterey Library, but a number of our neighboring cities have enhanced their library. Pacific Groves is in the midst of remodeling theirs. It's not really open yet, but when it does, they'll have a better library than they did before. And Seaside and Marina and Salinas and Castroville have all had some significant upgrades to their libraries. So the thought is that their residents might be less willing to pay Monterey to use our library if their library is better now than it was back in the days that they were paying before. So we really don't know how much revenue we would receive. You know, you could conceivably think you could get more than that if you raised the rates of the fees, but you also might get less than that, since our product is probably not as much better now as it was then. So anyway, that's a bit of an unknown. But the other thing we talked about a little bit before too is the potential effect of non-resident fees on fundraising. We think that's a very pragmatic issue that needs serious consideration if we were to think about charging non-resident fees. And again, with some work that Mary Jane did, she was able to get us some information on the proportion of the contributions that have been made over the last almost 4 years, I believe it was 3.9 years. We looked at the total dollar amount of the contributions and the percentage of that came from non-residents. And it was about 36% of the total dollar contributions that came from non-residents, or about $36,700 a year. And we're hoping that with the enhanced fundraising that we anticipate from the Friends and Foundation, that amount might go up, not only from residents, but also from non-residents. And so I think we would be very concerned that if we started charging non-residents, that would probably have a very negative effect on fundraising from non-residents. It's hard to know, but it would seem likely that someone that was paying to use our library would be much less likely to provide a donation. And so we think that there's some chance that, the reduction in fundraising from non-residents, might be larger than the revenue we would receive from non-resident fees. We don't really know. But we think it might be a wash. And so to us, that's a fairly major pragmatic reason to be very skeptical of charging non-resident fees. And just going back in history to when Monterey did start charging them, the cities of Pacific Grove and Carmel, as I understand it, purposely decided not to charge fees themselves at that point because they thought it would have a negative impact on their fundraising activities. And I know the city of Carmel has had quite a successful foundation that relies a fair amount, I believe, from people from Pebble Beach, A lot of Pebble Beach residents, I believe, use the Carmel Library as well as our library. But anyway, that's we think that's a major consideration that would need to really be considered if we were to look at non-resident fees, which again, this committee is not recommending. We're recommending against it. But I just wanted to highlight that reason in particular. And there are two other reasons to mention on that. One is just the Monterey is a hub both of tourism, of employment, and of education. There are a lot of people that come here to work or go to school or visit that are not residents, but that use our facilities, one of which is the library. And I think more than most cities in the area, Monterey is considered a regional hub. And in most cases, we're proud of that. And we know that we provide a high level of service, and that's part of why people are willing to visit here as well as enjoy working here and spend some sales tax dollars here as well. So we think that the fact that it is that regional hub makes it more appropriate that we are serving non-residents as well as residents. And then lastly is just the philosophical issue that a public library normally doesn't charge fees for basic services, even if they're not residents. And if we did start charging that, it would be quite different than the normal philosophy of a public library. And it would result in Monterey Public Library being barred from participation in MOBAC and also the Pacific Library Partnership. And there are some negatives to that, but that's not saying we couldn't do it. We're just saying that that's a consideration, that it would be philosophically quite different than the normal public library philosophy. So I'll stop beating that horse, but we can talk about it more if anybody wants to. But we felt pretty strongly that while the city has done that in the past, that we would strongly recommend that we not go that direction again. So with that, unless there's any questions, I would suggest we come back to the 3 action items, which are the items about the transient occupancy tax, the endowment fund annual payment, and the trustee stipends. So I'll stop there. And Harish, if you'd like to add anything, or Inga, before we go back to those 3 action items, feel free.
Just one more comment on the dead horse that you already beaten sufficiently, that compared to the previous time when we did institute fees for outside residents, the world has changed a lot to where now you can do a digital download from multiple sources, to where the need for being a member of the Monterey Library coming over there isn't as high as it would have been, say, 10 years ago. And so because of that, I don't feel in my bones that it would be a success to institute a charge, and that's my opinion.
Okay, very good. Inga, anything else you could add to my comments?
Well, Harish's comment just made me think of, now with Amazon and people buying books from Amazon, where you can buy a book, a used book for just a few dollars, people might think, well, rather than spending $50, $60 to use this one library, I'll use the other ones that don't charge me, and I'll spend that money directly in Amazon too. But otherwise,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that was an excellent summary of our discussions and thinking. So thank you very much, Jim.
Good. And if I could, I did want to come back to one issue back on the non-resident fees that I meant to mention and I forgot to, which is that we've been focusing quite a bit on the use of the Monterey Public Library by non-residents. But there is another piece of that, which is Monterey residents using other libraries. And in particular, I think we have a note in here about that in the last 6 months, there were 6,658 items that Monterey residents checked out of the out of the Pacific Grove Public Library. And we also talked a little bit about some of the shared services that we try to do with other cities. And so that aspect of our residents taking advantage of other libraries. And in particular, I believe a lot of residents of New Monterey may often use the Pacific Grove Library because it's probably as close as the Monterey Library is for them. And if they're doing business or whatever in Pacific Grove, I think they probably get a fair amount of business from Monterey residents that we aren't necessarily thinking of when we talk about the non-resident use of our library. So it's a bit of a two-way street, and I think we always have to keep that in mind as well. So with that, we turn it back over to the chair. If you'd like to take it, Marcia, to talk about the 3 action items and any other issues, any other questions people may have.
Oh, I think Marcia is muted there, and we do have some comments and really from the city manager's office as well, and happy to share them now or if you like, if that works.
That would be good. Yeah.
Very, very good. Very good. First of all, Jim, great, and Harish, outstanding report, very detailed, and we appreciate all of the suggestions and the feedback, and we're all very grateful for that, and glad to be part of this discussion with the library board as well, and I know we'll continue to do this in the future. As it relates to the charging fees to non-residents, this is an area that we know is quite controversial, but we think it might be worth further discussing in greater detail with the library board and with the community at large as we look into the future. We know it's unpopular for a number of reasons. The subcommittee recognized that there are a number of non-residents who work or go to school and are part of our Monterey community. Absolutely. We have residents who use other libraries, as we just discussed, New Monterey going to PG, for example. There's a concern that revenues charged to non-residents in the past have brought in $40,000, and there's a concern that if we charge fees to non-residents, that we're going to lose those dollars. Part of the challenge, though, is that the reality still exists that Monterey taxpayers is funding a library that serves more non-residents than residents, and they consume those services that add to the cost of the library that we provide. There's some interesting statistics that an independent report recently put out, and I'll just share them with you just a little bit here. One, the Monterey Public Library, the funding per capita for the library is $104 per resident, and that is well above the California average of $53 per resident and the national average of $39 per capita. Our collection budget is at $6.85 per capita, which is above the state average of $3.40. We spend $970 for every hour that we operate the library, which is 59% higher than the California average. And among the peer groups of comparable libraries, we have the second highest cost per capita and the highest cost per visit. It's $10 for every person who visits the library in total. So some of the questions, that we feel that we do need to ask and keep and have a conversation that we know won't end today. Is it fair to Monterey taxpayers to fund 100% of the service that's only used by 41% of residents? If we were to ask ourselves, how much in donations we receive from non-residents, which we know and we've discussed is around $40,000, we also need to ask ourselves how much services non-residents receive from the City of Monterey taxpayers. And when you take the percentage of use by our total budget, that's $1.9 million. So the $40,000 gives a 2.9% cost recovery from non-resident use of the library. And can we afford that? Can we afford to forego that type of revenue from non-residents that help offset the cost of services that are used? Because the reality is, it's not just the donations that we should be concerned about. It's the nearly $2 million that we provide in terms of services to the public and to non-residents. So these are just some of the questions that the city manager's office would like the library board to consider before we completely discount the concept. There are other ideas. I think, Jim, you've brought up really great other example of other types of fees, charging for programming, the passport services, room rental grants. I'm not really sure about the oil well in Ward County, Texas. I had to Google where that was because didn't know that existed. But in the short term, these are some of the issues that we can't afford to ignore. And I think Jim, your idea about the whole regionalization that both you and Harish brought up is one that we'd like to explore further. Even though it didn't work 10 years ago, doesn't mean necessarily it won't work today. Given the cities and counties' fiscal situations, consolidation may actually make more sense now than it did back then. It's been really inspiring to see the level of collaboration and coordination among all of the cities here in Monterey County and on the peninsula over the past several months. And it's been a really positive one. So we really think that regionalization is worth exploring. I'll use one quick example. Santa Cruz County, just a few years ago, came together along with Scotts Valley, Capitola, and Santa Cruz. They formed a JPA and initiated a parcel tax initiative. And that parcel tax helps fund library operations, management, and infrastructure so that library funding is sustainable. And it's really proven to be a success story. It doesn't entirely eliminate cities' general fund contributions to libraries, but it definitely does reduce that reliance on city funding that has dried up. So we think that's worth exploring. Again, in addition to fees for services, potential fees for non-residents and other concepts. So, we're, again, as staff, we're very grateful for your feedback, and I think this is a conversation we should continue to have, because the challenge that we're facing as a library and as a city is not just a spending problem, it's a revenue problem as well. So, thanks again for giving us an opportunity to give some feedback on these topics.
Nat, just a quick question about the data. So the data that you gave us originally about the cost was based on the library's former budget, right? The budget that...
That's correct. That's based on our average funding over the past 4 years. That's correct. So not funding today.
That was actually a report that Jim and Harish and I had looked at back on June 4th, Jim. I don't know if you remember, we received that report. Nat received a similar report when he attended a conference. In fact, the numbers are identical. And we had looked at that, and it was, I think the data was from 2016 to 2019 or something. And there were some curious comparisons. We were wondering why we were compared to some of the peer groups and so forth. So, yeah, there were some interesting things about that data.
I think it's really interesting about the peer groups, but when you look at the statewide costs, we know it costs more to do business here in California compared to the U.S. So maybe comparing with the U.S. isn't necessarily the best comparison. But it's a pretty telling story when you look at highest cost. We've got a $10.64 per visit, or that we're spending 60% higher than the California average to operate the library. These are things for us to look at and to explore. Why that is non-resident is the amount of services we're providing to a region that Monterey taxpayers are paying for. Is that part of the reason why those costs are so high?
Yeah.
I think comparison data like that is important, but I think we need to keep it current and in perspective, because if we look at the budget that the library has been given by the city for the next, or I guess now the current fiscal year, I'm just rounding off to 1.1 million. And if we say there are 29,000 people in the city, that's only $37 per capita. So we're nowhere near the $100 per capita amount that may have been true in the past, but is absolutely not true now. And certainly what we are going to be able to do with the drastically cut budget that we have been given for this current fiscal year should be a better gauge for what we think the per capita expenditure for the library should be. And I would also point out the fact that libraries are not anywhere considered to be major revenue producing services within a city, and that they are considered to be essential services much as public safety are. And while, say, the fire department may generate revenue because we contract with other cities to provide fire services, their raison d'etre is not to raise money for the city. And the library is in exactly that same situation when it comes to being an essential, necessary service for the community, but not one that is going to be a moneymaker. So I think we just have to keep all of that in proper and current day perspective when we're talking about what we might or might not consider charging for.
Yeah,
Thank
good.
you.
We're good points, Bob, and just to emphasize too, when I compare these data points, we're looking at the past, not this current fiscal year, which we all know is devastated due to COVID-19. But if we're going to plan for the future, these are some of the things that we want to talk about, and I'm glad we're looking at well over a dozen different revenue and expenditure management challenges. We've got short-term problems we've got to address and long-term. So that's, I think, why we're all here.
Right. Jim.
I don't particularly think it's productive right now to get bogged down in comparative data with other cities, but I did just want to mention that Harish and I did look, it sounds like, at the same data that Nat was referring to earlier. And we frankly, Nat, thought there were some problems with that data. And so we actually looked at some other data that Inga had that compared us to 20 other more comparable cities throughout California. And just for one example, on the cost per visit compared to those 20 other cities, we were right at the median. We were nowhere near the most expensive. And so I think the firm that gave that out was trying to convince cities that they could provide service more cheaply, which they probably could. But I think they were somewhat biased in how they were presenting some of the data. At least that was my perspective. So I think if we were to look at comparative data, I would strongly recommend we look at more neutral data, not from a firm that's trying to sell us their business, but something that looks at more comparable cities and make sure we know what we're making an apples to apples sort of comparison.
Yeah,
my sense was that there was some of that was not that at all.
That sounds great. In fact, I think we should have that look at that data more closely, see what are our true comparator agencies. We do this when we compare salary schedules, for example, based on market, cost, size of community. Some of the cities, though, that I think were on that comparison list are ones that Menlo Park, Los Gatos, these are cities that operate their own municipal library and are in the region and do cost. They're high cost of living areas too. So let's take a look at that, because I think it's worth us discussing and seeing how we compare.
I did want to clarify one more point, which is I don't think we are funded solely by local residents' taxpayer dollars. I thought that we've said recently how reliant our city is on the tourist dollars that come into our city, and that the transient occupancy tax actually pays a significant portion. So I think to characterize it as our taxpayers are paying for library service, I don't really think that's accurate. For the county libraries, I do believe there's a special property tax that's set aside to run those libraries, but that's not the case in the city of Monterey.
The way that when we talk taxpayers, and this just, my 16 years in city government, we always say, whether it's general fund, whether those general fund dollars come from TOT or sales tax or property tax, all those three large sources of revenue are general fund revenue. It's Monterey taxpayers ultimately. We consider that they're funds that are held by Monterey taxpayers, whether or not the ultimate person who's paying is someone from the seaside who's shopping at Del Monte Center or a visitor from Eureka.
So then it's the same taxpayers that pay sales tax when they live in Salinas or live in Marina, but spend their day working in Monterey and do their grocery shopping in Monterey and use the library in Monterey. Yeah.
But it's not Pacific Grove tourists, for example, who's contributing towards the use of the library. So.
Okay. So, Marcia, if I could suggest, if we could cycle back to the three items that there were action, or listen to public comment if there are other members of the public that have comment.
Well, I think it's let's look at the three items, and then before we vote, we'll take public comment as well.
Marcia, is it okay that I go ahead and open up the public comments right now? So
Sure.
but we won't actually take them, just to give the time in advance for people to call. So for anybody watching right now who would like to make a comment, you may dial 831-225-0330. Enter the number 1927648, followed by the pound sign. You will be automatically muted upon entry. Dial *5 to be placed in the queue to speak. Again, that number is 831-225-0330. Enter the ID number 1927648, followed by the pound sign. Thank you. So you can go ahead and proceed.
Okay, so perhaps we should take them one at a time and start with the first resolution. So, yes.
Did you-
Anyone want to comment on that resolution? Jim?
Yeah, it's not actually a resolution, but it is the recommendation that the library board authorize the chair to send a letter to the city council in support of the ballot measure increasing the city's transient occupancy tax from 10 to 12%. And there's a draft letter attached on packet page 35.
Any comments on this item? Do I entertain a motion to approve this item?
I'd so move.
A second?
Well, if Harish isn't speaking up, I'm going to assume that it was a split decision on your ad hoc committee. But I agree with it, so I will second it.
No, it was not split decision. It's just that it's after the fact now, because council's already voted 5-0, as I understand it. So it's like, well, what's the point? But
They actually haven't taken final action. That'll be next Tuesday, as I understand it, or next Wednesday, I believe.
Wednesday.
So they haven't not voted yet. They've indicated that they're supporting it, but they haven't yet officially voted. So it's late.
that it had already been, it's a done deal. No. All right, then I will second it if you would like. I was not against it. I was just not seeing the value in it.
Yeah. Okay, Francesca, do we now have a vote?
No, there are no comments. And just to clarify, then is it Trustee Joshi that is seconding that motion?
Correct.
Thank you. There are no callers right now.
Okay. So shall we vote? Francesca, you want to call?
Okay, thank you. So Trustee Joshi,
Aye.
Trustee Petty,
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Aye.
Chair Moreau.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, so shall we move on to the second recommendation, which is that the library board direct the community foundation to issue the 2020 payment from the endowment fund to the trust fund. And
No,
inform-
that's not the next one.
That's the next action item.
This is the next recommendation. The third one is the trustees waiving the stipends.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm flipping through on my tablet too fast.
The next recommendation. Inform the community foundation to revert to reinvesting the 2021 and subsequent annual payments back into the endowment fund unless the board takes subsequent action to request another annual payment to the trust fund. So, Bob.
I have a question just for clarification. The report says that if we asked for one for 2020, it would be $12,758. And that would be asking for, like this month or next month. But normally it would be an annual distribution if we asked for it. And normally they do it in March. And if we did ask for another one in March, it would be 13/3. So is the 12/7 kind of a belated what we would have gotten if we'd asked for it in this past March?
That's exactly correct.
Okay, and so, all right, that answers my question. So the 13/3 is basically what we would get from last March to this coming March.
Yeah, and that's a very, because it depends, of course, on.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
And the market activity and so on. But based on everything we know now, that's the best estimate they could provide.
And the 4.5%, do they calculate that, in March? So it's like 4.5% of whatever happened on a rolling 12-month time period?
I think it's actually a rolling 24 months, if I remember correctly. And I don't know when they calculate it, but it's sometime prior to March of each year.
Okay.
I just want to make one comment, which is that the endowment has been a hard fought, a very hard-working, it's been built up piece by piece and it's been a painful and hard process to get it to this point. And would only be in the direst of emergencies that I would say start pulling the interest out of the endowment, because it is the seed corn of the library. And it's only in an emergency would I see this happening. So I certainly hope that this is the first and last time that this will happen. Because
And am I correct, Jim, that if we vote to ask them for the 12/7 for 2020, that money will go into the trust fund and it will not be seen as replacing any of the 1.1 million that the city allocated in the general fund?
That's my understanding.
Harish.
I have one comment came up during our talks. It's not there in the report, but I have in my mind the model of a hardship withdrawal from your retirement accounts. Something that you can do, but it's not designed to be a money that you take it out as a gift, but rather it's a loan. And if we are serious about the endowment, I think when we are able to, it would be nice if we're able to put some of that money back that we are withdrawing. It's not a requirement, but it would make me a lot happier knowing that this was not just free money that we were taking out and splurging on. That we really are in need of it, we're taking it out, but we intend to put it back as soon as we can.
So there is a plan for this money?
So I think I'll just comment that I know there's a plan to talk with the city manager and the chair and the vice chair about funding, and it's not clear yet what would be done with this money if you did take it out. So you might want to wait for that conversation before you take action.
For full transparency, I think similar to the way that we have subcommittees, there will be a subcommittee of consisting of the chair and the vice chair of the library board, along with the Friends and Foundation leadership. I think 2 members from there who are planning on meeting with our library director, Inga, myself, and city manager, Hans Uslar, to discuss use of kind of how this fund would be used and how the vision of the library, at least in the short term. So I think that's what Inga's referring to of having this conversation. So.
Right. And so if the money isn't immediately needed, I'd like to suggest that we postpone the vote on this one until after that meeting, which is, I believe, on August 11th.
It's that week, yeah.
The week of August 10th sometime. And so perhaps we can, if we can wait, bring that piece to the next meeting instead. That's just a suggestion. Are you, Jim and Harish, amicable to deferring a vote on this particular resolution till then?
I'm fine either way.
Okay. So can we move on to the third recommendation? That is that the trustees waive the stipends for their service for both 2019-20 and 2021. If those of us who have been on, I'm not sure that Harish has been on the board when the 2019-20.
If I could quickly just mention procedurally on this, first of all, thank you, very generous of all of you and other commissioners in other boards and commissions who've expressed an interest in foregoing the stipend. Procedurally, this is going to be done on a commissioner by commissioner basis. There's no real easy way to say, okay, an entire board is going to forego the stipend. So we are going to, by early next week, send an email to all boards and commissioners to talk about and discuss the process by which each individual library board member or planning commissioner, what have you, can forego a stipend, because it may require you to take this, either A, not get the stipend, or B, give a refund back and donate those dollars manually, or aka via check, back to the city or back to the library trust fund, however you choose to do so.
I think that's fine, but I think this kind of is the spirit of that. So I think we can go ahead and vote on this resolution anyway, as the spirit of the intent, and then we'll worry about the implementation.
Sounds good.
Bob.
Yeah. Am I wrong in remembering, excuse me, that the stipends, maybe all but one, for 2019-20 have already been distributed?
I believe I don't know about for everyone, but I believe they're only paid once a year and they haven't been paid yet. At least
So each,
Francesca.
yes, just to answer that question, the Library Board of Trustees is paid annually at the end of the fiscal year. Thus, the payment was not submitted this year due to the action that was taken at the previous board meeting. Other commissions are paid differently.
Okay, so there's still time.
Okay.
Depending on
That's
how
what I want to determine. For some reason, I was thinking they were paid quarterly, and therefore at least 3/4 of our 2019-20 stipend had already been sent to us, and then that would involve having to reimburse it and all that. Okay, good.
Okay, so shall we go ahead and vote on this recommendation? Do I have a motion?
We can approve the recommendation, but I don't think that negates what Nat said about each individual trustee having to speak for themselves when the city contacts them.
This is the intent we're voting on here, not the
Correct.
implementation. They can take care of the implementation.
I'm sorry, this is kind of a complication, but it is an item that's budgeted into the general fund budget of the library, and that line was zeroed out. And so if it turns out that some trustees don't want to waive their stipend, there's going to have to be some kind of budget adjustment to put those funds back into the library budget.
But that would be up to us to do.
So what may happen is that we get the stipends and then donate them to the library. Right, we could do that.
But the fund that pays for those stipends is current for this fiscal year has a zero budget amount.
I see. Well, that's an interesting.
Anyway, that's the detail that we can work out with Nat and the finance.
We figure out, Francesca, library board may be slightly different, like Francesca mentioned. So there may be a way to, if you make the motion, we'll see if we can implement it among all the library board members and worry about the other commissioners separately.
Thank you very much. Okay, do I have a motion here somebody want to?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
And I'll second.
Thank you. Okay,
Okay.
now, any other discussion on this motion? Okay, Francesca?
As I understand it, they're giving it up for the one that would be coming due next month. and the one that will be paid a year from next month, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Trustee Joshi,
Aye.
Trustee Petty,
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Aye.
Chair Moreau.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so are there other items in this report? I'm not sure. We could start and go through it page by page and say, is there anything on page 28 of the packet that anybody wants to discuss? If not, page 29. I did have a question on page 29, and that is the book sales. I know that there are a lot of volunteers, and this might be the perfect time to think about launching the online book sales. The Marina Library seems to be making a lot of money from that. And I know that many times individuals come to your book sale and buy hundreds and hundreds of books and then turn around and sell them online, which is fine. But I mean, if they can do it, I think that maybe we can do it too. So that, that whole online book sale piece.
So the Friends are thinking about doing a sort of a curbside buy a bag of mysteries, a mystery bag of mysteries, mystery bag of biographies as an immediate way to raise some funds, but they're also committed to developing more of an online presence. So long term, they would like to do more online. Short term, you might hear that they're going to do some mystery bags where they're able to sell them without minimal contact.
And then the one about either the matching grants or their potential grant opportunities. I'm thinking maybe there's a volunteer who retired and in a previous life was wrote grants that we might look for somebody to do that. And sometimes even to pay somebody a small amount of consulting money to write a grant that will bring in a large amount of money. So those are things to think about.
Well, I know that the current president of the Friends had said that his arm could be twisted to help write grants if we needed on a volunteer basis. And then of course we have, I typically will write the grants, but Mary Jane Perna is also somebody who can write grants. But yeah, if we can find more grant writer volunteers, that would be great as well.
Any other comments on any of that page, or how about the next page, page 30?
I would like to just mention that I'm going forward to page 33, section B as in Bob, packet page 33. And I just wanted to emphasize, I agree with all of the, oh, wait a minute, I hit my finger here. Problem with having it on an electronic page. Okay, I agree with all of the points that are included in section B there on page 33. But I just wanted to point out that the sentence following the section heading says the funding committee does not recommend, and that's different than recommending against. And as Jim said when he was discussing all of those items, the committee is actually recommending against doing those. It's not just that they're standing back and not promoting them. And I think that's an important distinction with which I agree 100% that I would, without more investigation, argue against all three of those as the recommendation states there.
Okay,
Yeah, if I could, I would just agree with Bob's comment. In fact, the very heading of that says ideas recommended against. So that definitely was
Yeah.
intent, but you're right, they are different. And the emphasis should be on recommending against.
okay. Any other comments on this wonderful report? Well, we thank you. We thank you very much, both Harish and Jim and Inga, for putting in what I'm sure was a tremendous amount of time and effort to have write an excellent report. And so next week, next month's meeting, we'll bring back when we know a little bit more about the financial situation, we'll bring back recommendation number 2.
And if I could, just a point of clarification, Marcia, I believe the Ad Hoc Funding Committee feels like with the completion of this discussion that our work is done. And so I'd ask Inga to bring that item, the one about the Endowment Fund, back as a staff report, because unless the board or the chair requests otherwise, we feel that we've completed our work.
I think you have, and thank you very much for a job well done.
Thank you.
Okay. So our next item is item number 7. Now, the agenda says informational staff comments. Do we do staff comments here? Or do we need more public comments? Or we move on to item number 7?
Yes.
Yeah, item 7.
No, Inga is trying. Inga, were you starting to speak, but your microphone is muted?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So I was gonna say, I don't have any staff comments.
Okay. No, nobody else does? No.
Well, I will say I'm really grateful, and I know we're counted as staff in city manager's office. I think we are, but grateful and appreciative of all of your work. And again, both Commissioner or Board Member Thompson and Board Member Joshi, both great report, and looking forward to our continued conversations about our beloved library and the services we provide. So thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a great team with Francesca as well, and the staff who've the very limited number of staff that we have doing a lot of great work with the curbside pickup, and continue to acknowledge and thank them for their hard work.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to item number 7, which is to receive the summary of standard procedures of the Monterey Public Library Board of Trustees. Bob or Jim?
Yeah. This item is informational. It was brought to my attention by Jim, maybe 6-8 months ago at least, that there might be some confusion in some of the operational aspects of the board. And there was wondering whether we need to change the code, charter, bylaws, policy, all those kinds of things. And after discussion and investigation of all this, there really isn't any need to make those formal changes. There certainly may be or was a benefit to pulling together some of the common operational aspects of the way the board does its business, so that it's kind of like a handy reference, almost like a cheat sheet or a crib sheet. And this is very similar to what is usually called standing orders that I have used both as a state commissioner on the Commission on Aging, also as a representative from Monterey County on the California Senior Legislature, and as chair of committees within both of those 2 state level groups. They have what's called standing orders, and we came up with the name standard procedures instead of standing orders. You say tomato, I say tomato. It doesn't really make a lot of difference, because what this document does is not create anything new. It doesn't come up with new ideas, so that's why it's not an item on which we have to vote. It is taking some of the most important and ideally frequently used aspects of the way we do business, putting them on a brief document. So you see this is only 2 pages, and it is simply to exist as a, pardon me, as a reference for our use, and that there are certainly times that occur much less frequently, maybe not even at all in our lifetimes, but for which there are answers that we would look up. For example, in terms of rules of order of conducting a meeting, we rely on Rosenberg's rules as the guidelines, and that's what other entities within our city do. At the state, they often use Robert's Rules of Order, which was a precursor to Rosenberg's and is much more extensive and longer than Rosenberg's, which is designed for use by municipalities. And Rosenberg had the same thought in mind when groups created standing rules, or we have this standard procedure summary. And that is to take from something that's much more complicated than it typically needs to be and put it in more succinct summary form. So I'm not going to go over all these points at all. They are already in existence elsewhere in documents which we follow. And this is simply to have, at our side for a quick reference when the time comes. And if something that I believe Jim used the term esoteric in one of the communications he and I had back and forth. If we come up with something that's more esoteric and more infrequent and not as basic, then we'll go to the more detailed source and get the answer for whatever we're not sure about. But this gives us flexibility. It maintains the autonomy and ability of the board to make decisions for how it does business. And there you have it. So it's simply a report that is being passed out, and just like bylaws, this can be changed if we need to, but right now this is based on the way we are following the various sources cited.
Okay,
So that's my offering for today.
any questions or comments? I just wanted to say I appreciate the fact that it has the word summary in it, because it does give you the understanding that it was culled from other documents and just summarizes them.
Right, there's nothing that's new or creative other than, maybe I restated something in a way that was more clearly understood at a moment's notice, like a cheat sheet would be.
Right. Yeah.
I'd just like to add that, as Bob said, I raised a couple of questions when I was first new to the Board of Trustees. And so I think this document might be particularly useful for any new trustees, because every organization has somewhat different voting rules. Oh, I thought I was muted. I'm sorry.
No.
So I just wanted to thank Bob for drafting this. I think it does help clear up some questions that I had initially. That if I had a document like this, I would have saved a lot. It would have saved me a lot of time, and so hopefully it'll save future new members time as well. Or we may forget and be able to pull it out and during a meeting if something comes up that we can't quite remember. So I appreciate the work Bob did putting this together. Thank you.
Yes, I'll certainly find it useful, and whoever replaces Ralph will be the new member. So thank you for doing that in time.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments?
And I would just throw out too that since sooner or later we'll have a new member, because we need to replace Ralph on the board. Whenever that happens, I would love to work with Inga and collaborate on the new member orientation that she does, and help to whatever extent I can in these matters, these subjects.
Thank you. Okay, so we move on
Thank
to
you.
the penultimate receiving the financial report.
All right, so this is the financial report for the final month of last fiscal year. And I just think it's always a good idea to include, but I didn't have anything in particular that I wanted to point out about it, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that trustees might have.
Any questions? I just had a quick question on the expenditure balances, the 37,000. I think we've talked about it before, but the budget amendment.
Right. So that was the money that was brought over for the Group 4 project.
Oh, got it. Yeah. Okay. Which we'll be talking about at the next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Any,
Well, somebody might look at that same page, Inga, and say, how come it says we only spent 50%?
Right.
Go ahead.
So we held back a little bit of payment. I think it's only about $3,000 or less for Group 4 because they haven't done the final part of their project, which was to make a report to the City Council. So yeah, it was less than 3,000. But anyway, and then we also had a contingency amount so that in case the project had gone over, we had to have a certain percentage to cover that. So that's why 100% wasn't spent. But also, I think, what packet page are we looking at?
Well, I was looking at 42, the next to the last page, where it talks about the trust fund.
Mm-hmm.
And in the lower right corner of that, total,
that's
total percent spent 50.2%.
Correct. So each year you approve a trust fund budget for how much we're going to spend on different types of activities, and then we spend funds, but we underspent by that amount.
and that's trust fund money.
That's trust fund money. So the money that's not
money
spent,
that we can roll over because it's still in the trust fund.
Exactly.
well, it doesn't roll over actually. It sort of goes back into the big pool of trust fund, and then it can be reallocated again through a process where you ask the council to appropriate it for a specific purpose again.
Yeah, my point is that it's not general fund city money that was unspent. It was almost 50% of the trust fund that sits in a separate category.
Correct. Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess we move on to trustee comments. We start with Trustee Joshi.
Sorry, I missed that. What was it that we were doing now?
Oh, trustee comments. Anything, any announcements or any questions or any?
I don't have any questions. That's all right. I was busy reading this. I missed that question.
Okay, Trustee Petty.
Harish, did you say that the Friends and Foundation is still planning the chocolate and wine event in February?
No, they're.
Or has that been canceled? I wasn't sure.
Two things. They're thinking of doing a virtual one in February, and they're going to postpone a possible one for fall. If things change to where we can do it, then it'll be something we'll decide for fall, but not for now. It's
okay. That's what was confusing to me. When you said fall, I was thinking fall is 2 months from now, but you meant fall of 2021.
Right.
So that means that if we have a virtual one in February, I have to drink all my own beer.
Yeah, I could bring you some.
I can't, but I can't bring some to the event and share it. Okay. So I just wanted clarification on that. And just thank everybody for all the good work, and looking forward to, coming up with new ways of being successful, because everybody's talking about a new normal. And, I want to be at the head of the line creating that.
Okay. Trustee Thomas?
No comments, thank you.
Then I get the last word. First of all, I just wanted to clarify the meeting date schedule. So we are now on the fourth Thursday of the month and at 4 o'clock, and we will stay in that cycle and that at that time for the foreseeable future. So unless we hear otherwise, except the month of November and December by our charter, we only have one meeting. So we don't meet in November. It just so happens this year, the fourth Thursday of November is Thanksgiving Day, and the fourth Thursday of December is Christmas Eve. So we, instead of having a meeting fourth Thursday of November and fourth Thursday of December, we will have a meeting on the first Thursday of December, which I believe is the 3rd of December. Maybe it's the 4th. I think it's the 3rd. So that will be our meeting schedule. I just wanted to clarify it because we seem to be moving around and the second thing I wanted to mention is it's the season to do the director's evaluation. It turns out that's kind of due in September. So we used to do it in June, but we're moving it to the fall. So I will be sending out to the trustees data from the survey that Bob did in the spring when we still had employees, the staff survey, and a form that we'll all fill out, and then we'll get together in closed session sometime around the next meeting in August, and will to be determined, and then we will meet with Inga after that. It's probably in September. So that's our schedule for that. Other than that, thank you for bearing with me on my first meeting as I try to learn the ropes and try to figure out what it is, what happens when, by whom, and where. And everyone should stay healthy. And thank you, Francesca, for herding the cats. Okay.
Excellent job. Thank you.
Okay,
everyone.
thank you all. Okay.
Have a great evening.
Okay, bye.